eerie soundtrack of helicopter engines, sirens, and police radios cloaked the historic Palace of Westminster, home of Britain's Houses of Parliament, as tourists, journalists, and lawmakers ran for cover after what police called a terrorist attack Wednesday. 4 people were killed and 40 others were injured before the assailant was himself shot and killed. Members of Parliament, or MPs, were locked inside the House of Commons as police secured the scene. Tourists were trapped on the London Eye, the enormous celebratory Ferris wheel on the nearby south bank of the River Thames. Authorities raced to fish a seriously injured woman out the Thames, into which she had fallen from Westminster Bridge. Police in bright fluorescent jackets shepherded tourists, officers, journalists, and lawmakers away from the scene as they emptied the streets around Parliament, block by block. All experienced what was described as a shared sense of shock and horror.
Sick and tired, these Venezuelans suffer from chronic illnesses. They say they can no longer afford or even find the medicine needed to treat their symptoms.
The politicians are killing us because we don't have medicine. We are dying. We could have better quality of life with medicine, but we don't have them, and they are too expensive.
Venezuela is in the grips of an economic recession. The crisis has led to a shortage of medicine and has created a public health emergency. The Pharmaceutical Association says 85 of every 100 medicines are unavailable. Sufferers of cancer, Parkinson's, and transplant patients united and called for the government to do more.
There are no drugs for diabetes and for many other health conditions, so we have come to form a chain of life for ourselves. Enough already. How many deaths do we want?
President Nicolas Maduro has blamed the shortages on detractors, trying to undermine him. He said he's approved spending to increase access to drugs, but details remain unclear. It's not only medicine that's lacking. There's also a shortage of food, leaving some people to scavenge for it wherever they can.
I have a fixed salary, a minimum wage, which is not enough. I can't afford products, so I'm forced to do this.
And he's not alone. A study recently found that 93% of Venezuelans can't afford sufficient food for their families. As shortages continue, many are left to fend for themselves. Whitney Hurst, Al Jazeera.
CBS News reports that severe storms that moved across the southeast Tuesday into Tuesday night left at least 1 person dead and tens of thousands of homes and businesses without power. A man was killed when a tree fell on his house in Jackson County, northeast of Atlanta, but another was freed after a fallen tree pinned him to his mattress in Hall County, Georgia, also northeast of Atlanta. The mother, father, and their 2 young children were packed onto one bed because the storm was scaring the children, and the tree fell directly onto the room where they were sleeping. Everyone was able to get out except for the father, who authorities say was killed instantly.
Roughly 40% of North Koreans are reportedly undernourished. A new United Nations report also finds that over 70% of the population is food insecure and relies on food aid. The report cited natural and man-made disasters, as well as a lack of agricultural land, seed, and tools as factors in insufficient food production. It also says government rations were reduced from 380 grams per person per day to only 300 for several months last year. This would be just over half the recommended caloric intake, and it falls short of the government target of 573 grams per person per day. The report says international sanctions have made administering aid more difficult by preventing the transfer of funds and equipment. The UN also notes a significant decline in donor funding since 2012. That's resulted in cuts to aid in many areas. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
Define the raging river. Along Peru's north and central coast, rescue teams are overwhelmed. These are Peru's worst floods in decades. Half of the country is in state of emergency. Thousands of Peruvians are taking matters into their own hands. They say they cannot wait for the government to deal with the emergency on its own. Elizabeth Callao came to this stadium, one of 10 collection points, to donate what she could for the victims.
We have to help each other as brothers and sisters. Every grain of sand is important.
Volunteers are packing food, water, clothes, blankets, diapers, medicine, among other items. Carla Bravo took time off from work to help bundle the aid. She says there is no time to lose.
I know my country is suffering. There are people who don't have anything, so we came out to help a bit.
1 month ago, there were only 6 people helping out here, says Andrea Costa.
Now we have counted 2,500 people each day helping, and they come here without expecting anything in return.
These sacks are ready for shipment. Nearly 900 tons leave every day from this stadium alone, and it's all from citizens showing their solidarity with the victims.
The Army, Air Force and Navy are delivering relief across the country. Chile and Colombia have sent more than 50 tons of humanitarian aid and a plane to airlift victims for safety. Peru's government has launched a national TV broadcast from the National Emergency Operations Center to keep people informed.
The air and maritime bridges are working well. We are giving priority to people and humanitarian aid. On Sunday, we had 2,500 tons that we are distributing.
While officials are trying to reassure Peruvians, scientists say that the disaster is far from over.
It seems we're at the peak, but even if the rains stop, the soil in the north and central coast is very humid. Now, it doesn't take a strong rain to cause more landslides, so the risk factor will continue to be of the same magnitude as we see now.
More than 100,000 Peruvians are homeless already. The crisis could get worse. Experts say it is likely the extreme weather that began in January will last for at least another month. Mariana Sanchez, Al Jazeera, Lima, Peru.
Islamic State militants are shelling areas recaptured by Iraqi forces in western Mosul. They're hitting civilians who are fleeing the fighting as troops continue to edge their way through the dangerous streets of the old city. The battle for Mosul, which is the Islamic State's last stronghold in Iraq, is entering its 6th month. Iraqi forces are backed by U.S.-led coalition airstrikes. Around 600,000 civilians remain in the western sector of Mosul, which continues to complicate the battle. Thousands escape daily to camps or areas in the government-controlled east.
Preparing food is one of the few tasks Abdallah Lakhlali can still help with. An active man, he's now often housebound. In the Brussels bombing, his leg was ripped apart, his life shattered.
I can no longer play with my kids. I can't take a shower by myself. I can no longer use the bathroom. Someone has to help me in and out. And some days I can't use my prosthetic limb. I get sores and infections, and it's very painful.
The first attacks struck Brussels airport, where Abdallah was working. One bomb went off 20 meters in front of him. As people ran for the exit, another bomb exploded. An hour later, the metro was targeted. 3 bombs, 32 lives taken, more than 300 scarred by injuries. The suicide attacks hit at the heart of Europe and plunged Belgium into panic. Another life that changed dramatically that day was Faisal Shafuz. He was identified as the 3rd airport bomber, the man in the hat. But police got it wrong. Despite being released, he's still being harassed.
I'm living in fear. Who will protect me from the police? I've been stopped more than 5 times. I'm suspected of being a terrorist, but it's me that's being terrorized. I'm not armed, but they come into my house with weapons, shields, handcuffs, balaclavas, but I'm always set free. It's like the police have tunnel vision.
In post-attack Brussels, Shafuz is not alone in claiming police brutality. Human rights groups say there's been a rise in verbal and physical abuse by security forces against minorities. As worrying to them are the new laws being pushed through.
The authorities can take away someone's passport without any kind of judicial review. That's very concerning. The authorities can look at your emails and your telephone records, again, without judicial review. So there's no check on this authority. There's no check on power, and that's always a dangerous situation.
Preventing further attacks is the government's priority. It says cases of police abuse are isolated incidents and are by no means the result of a deliberate policy.
A year on, Belgium is still on high alert. Troops patrol the streets and military vehicles guard areas deemed at high security risk. The government says these are just temporary measures, but it's feeling like the new normal, and many here feel like they're living in a different landscape. Charlie Angela, Al Jazeera, Brussels.
According to CBS News, North Korea has launched another missile test, but the test ended in failure. The missile had exploded within seconds. This failed test follows several successful test launches in the last year. Neither the U.S. or South Korea has released information on what type of missile was fired or why the test failed. The attempted launch came 4 days after North Korea had announced that it had tested a new rocket engine, describing it as a great leap forward in their missile program.
A bumblebee received some extra protection in the United States. U.S. Fish and Wildlife announced Tuesday, March 21st, the rusty-patched bumblebee was listed as an endangered species. It is the first bee of any kind in the contiguous 48 states to be declared endangered. The Obama administration proposed federal protections for the bee last fall, but the incoming Trump administration blocked them in January by executive order. An environmental advocacy group called the Natural Resources Defense Council sued last month, arguing that suspending the listing violated the law. The administration lifted the block on Tuesday. Fish and Wildlife says bees are key pollinators of crops in the U.S. The population and range of the rusty-patched bumblebee, so named for the reddish blotch on its abdomen, has declined by about 90% since the 1990s. Fish and Wildlife says the endangered designation will help focus resources to stop the bee's population decline. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Kimberly Caldwell.
Reuters reports that about 17,000 AT&T Inc. workers in California and Nevada have gone on strike on Wednesday, alleging that the company violated contract terms by forcing employees to do work outside their areas of expertise. According to Reuters, the employees who work in the company's phone, landline, and cable services businesses have been working without a contract for almost a year. In a statement, AT&T said, "We're engaged in discussion with the union to get these employees back to work as soon as possible."
British lawmakers were locked down inside Parliament on Wednesday as a frightening scene unfolded outside. A woman was killed and many others were injured in an attack just outside Parliament on Westminster Bridge, the British Press Association said. Members of Parliament took to Twitter to post messages and updates to the outside world. Several members of Parliament also turned their attention to the emergency personnel putting their lives on the line. "My heart and prayers go out to those affected and to our brave emergency services," Jim McMahon said.
Wednesday, March 22nd, the FBI was questioned by both Republicans and Democrats about the facial recognition software they use to identify potential suspects. They believe the FBI software invades American privacy, inspires racial bias, and leads to the arrest of innocent people. Stephen Lynch, Democrat, Massachusetts, stated, "I have zero confidence in the FBI and the Justice Department, frankly, to keep this in check. This is really Nazi Germany here, what we're talking about, and I see little difference in the way people are being tracked under this. Just getting one wide net and getting information on all American citizens."
Germany is working to make amends to thousands of gay men convicted under a Nazi-era law. The country's cabinet approved a bill March 22nd to clear the convictions of those prosecuted for homosexuality under paragraph 175. Enforcement of the law relaxed in 1969, but more than 68,000 men were convicted until the law was scrapped in 1994, according to The Guardian. In 2002, Germany cleared the convictions of men prosecuted during Nazi rule, but that didn't apply to men prosecuted after the war. Justice Minister Heiko Maas said the move was long overdue. The decision follows a similar one in the United Kingdom. The UK recently said it would pardon gay and bisexual men convicted under the so-called Alan Turing law. If Germany's bill passes, eligible men will receive 3,000 euros and an additional 1,500 euros for each year spent in jail. Only 5,000 men are thought to be alive to receive compensation. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Kimberly Caldwell.
Jakarta is a booming capital in Asia, but still this river is used as a source of water for millions here. People use it to do their dishes, to wash themselves, and some even drink it after boiling it. But at the same time, as you can see, this river is used for dumping garbage. So not surprisingly, this water is full of bacteria like E. coli. What not many people know is the risk of drinking groundwater. Because of a lack of tap water, 40% of the people here in Jakarta are forced to drink from rivers or from wells like this one. But the water is also contaminated because septic tanks here are not regularly cleaned. The government calls it a critical condition because many people are depending on this water for their daily needs. And drinking this, you run the risk of a serious disease. While the government is blaming the people for their unclean behavior, the main problem lies with the government and the water companies themselves. For 2 decades already, the water supply for the capital of Indonesia has not been increased, and pipes that are used to distribute water throughout the city are rotten or even stolen. And until today, drinking water from the tap here is considered unsafe. So despite promises by the government that by 2019 all Indonesians will have clean drinking water, many consider this promise as an empty promise.
It looks like a regular aircraft carrier, but it's designed as a floating launch pad for helicopters. It's called the Kaga. It's one of the biggest military vessels Japan has commissioned since World War II. Japan says the ship can be used for carrying out rescue missions during natural disasters, but its enormous deck can accommodate larger helicopters, which can destroy sea mines or attack submarines. And the Japanese military admits that Chinese subs are a potential target. In 2015, when the Kaga was launched, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe asked Parliament to revise the country's pacifist security policy. Japan's military can now fight alongside its allies. Defense spending has been increased. The Kaga has been going through sea trials in the last 2 years. In that time, there's been a rise in tension on the seas of Southeast Asia, particularly between China and Japan. The Kaga's sister ship, the Isumo, is expected to head for the South China Sea in May. From today, the Kaga will be on active duty, and it too is expected to sail into choppy waters. Rob Matheson, Al Jazeera.
Many California communities are experiencing recent rates of childhood lead poisoning that surpass those of Flint, Michigan. According to blood testing data obtained by Reuters, one section of Fresno has shown rates of lead poisoning nearly 3 times higher than Flint. The data shows how lead poisoning is affecting a state known for its environmental advocacy. High rates of childhood exposure have also been found in the Bay Area and downtown Los Angeles. These figures show that despite efforts to remove lead-based products, hazards still remain in these areas of California.
The International Organization for Migration estimates more than 20,000 migrants have arrived in Europe by sea since the beginning of 2017. The organization said the numbers are likely to explode as the continent heads into spring. These totals do not include the more than 3,000 migrants picked up near Libya, who are currently en route to Italy. Drowning deaths for the period have also increased to about 500, which is up from 159 last year. The European Border and Coast Guard Agency confessed that its own activities and the ones by vessels operated by pro-migration NGOs are responsible for the rising death toll.
A Native American tribe in Oklahoma has voted to permit same-sex marriage. The Osage Nation joins a small group of prominent tribes changing their law following the U.S. Supreme Court's 2015 decision making the practice legal in all states. The same-sex case known as Oberfell v. Hodges has gone through the 567 federally recognized Indian nations. As sovereign entities, they are not necessarily bound by the Supreme Court decision. This places many in the position of deciding whether to make the issue part of their traditional law. 52% approved a referendum amending the definition of marriage in the Osage tribe's legal code to include same-sex couples.
A survey found that more than 1 in 3 U.S. Muslims fear they could be targeted by white supremacist groups following President Donald Trump's election. 42% say their children have been bullied in school because of their faith. Cracking down on what Trump has called radical Islamic terrorists and restricting travel from certain Middle Eastern countries have been major elements of his presidency. According to the study released by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, the fear of being targeted contributes to a lower than average rate of voting by adult Muslim citizens.
The top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee claimed this week that he has seen more than circumstantial evidence that associates of President Donald Trump colluded with Russia while the Kremlin attempted to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. NBC News reports that Representative Adam Schiff, the ranking member on the committee, was asked while appearing on Meet the Press whether or not he only has a circumstantial case. Shiv responded, "I don't want to get into specifics, but I will say that there is evidence that is not circumstantial and is very much worthy of an investigation."
A new public opinion survey shows that 33% of women voters cannot afford to pay more than $10 for prescription birth control because of those economic realities shown by the Periodum survey. 77% of women surveyed want to keep the ACA birth control benefit, compared with 56% of male voters. The National Women's Law Center says access to birth control provides health benefits for women and children, improves women's ability to control whether and when they have a child, and fosters women's ability to participate in education and the workforce on an equal footing with men.
While powerful laser beams that can zap drones from the sky may sound like something out of a sci-fi movie, Lockheed Martin says that it will hand off exactly that to the U.S. Army in the next few months. The defense company said that it had finished creating a 60-kilowatt laser system for the U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command. That's double the power of a laser weapon system Lockheed touted 2 years ago that reportedly disabled a truck from a mile away. To produce this kind of power, Lockheed has developed what it calls a combined fiber laser beam, which brings together individual lasers to form a single, stronger beam. In a March 16th press release, Lockheed said that in tests earlier this month, the laser beam system achieved a 58-kilowatt blast, a world record for a laser of this type. For Newsbeat Social from Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.
Opposition parties are worried President Robert Mugabe's ruling ZANU-PF party will try to manipulate the voters' roll before next year's elections. That's why they're protesting. They don't want Zimbabwe's government to control the buying and monitoring of biometric voter registration kits. They say they want the United Nations to monitor the registration and voting. Morgan Tsvangirai, Zimbabwe's main opposition leader, says he is afraid.
Every time we go to election, it is contested. Every time we go to election, it is a dispute. Why should we have a character of an election which is violent and which is always dependent on cohesion and intimidation?
The government says it does not need help from the UN and accuses Western nations and opposition parties of trying to bring about regime change.
ZANU-PF officials say they are not trying to rig next year's elections. They say the message to the opposition is get out of the cities and go and campaign in the rural areas where most people in Zimbabwe live.
For some people, Wednesday's protest was a test for the opposition to see if they are united. Some party leaders here say they want Tsvangirai to lead the coalition when it is formed to challenge Mugabe in next year's elections. But others, like Joyce Mujuru, did not show up. Some political analysts say ZANU-PF officials may not only be worried about an opposition coalition. Zimbabwe's leader is 93 years old. The fight to succeed him is dividing the ruling party.
I think that the elements in the state, in the civilian bureaucracy, and in the military bureaucracy, that is not supporting President Mugabe's way of managing the transition or managing the succession politics in ZANU.
Even though the election is next year, the country is already in campaign mode and on edge. The police say they did not allow people to march through the capital Harare to prevent looting. Opposition supporters were confined to a field on the edge of the city. The protest was also about the economy and high rate of unemployment. Independent economists say more than 90% of Zimbabweans are vendors because they can't find work despite having degrees and other qualifications.
Life in the informal sector is so tough. We are suffering from all ends. We are totally between two sharp horns of a dilemma.
Zimbabwe's opposition insists they'll keep on protesting until things improve. They say next time they will march through the city even if the police don't allow them. Haru Matasa, Al Jazeera, Harare.